The member for Cannington.
Madam Speaker, the last of the last. I rise to deliver my final speech to the Parliament of Western Australia. 1,800 seconds to summarise 41 years of political activism. To start, I want to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional owners of this land and of the lands of the Cannington electorate. I'm very grateful to the people of Cannington for electing me 4 times. It's been an honour and privilege to represent you in the Parliament. My first loyalty has always been to the people of Cannington. My next acknowledgement is to my family. My wife, Kate Doust, and I have a unique relationship. While we're not the only married couple in the parliaments around the country, there are not many of us. When Kate was elected in 2001, I was elected as ALP State Secretary shortly after. Our kids were aged just 9, 6 and 3 at the time, and it was difficult for them. Many families have both parents working, and there are many FIFO families. It's not as if our family struggle was harder than the struggle of other families, but that doesn't mean our family life was easy, and the toll on our children was huge. Sorry. That our 3 kids, Beck, Zoe and Liam, have successful lives is a credit to their own endeavour and resilience. Kate and I are very proud of them. When Beck got married, she had the great imagination to marry another Liam. But he's called Roachie, so we don't get confused between our son Liam and our son-in-law Liam. I think Roachie was happy to move to the US after their wedding, literally on the other side of the planet, because he was able to get away from his in-laws. When he and Beck moved back to Perth with their 2 children, Cora and Tash, I'm sure that made him nervous. I'm the 8th child of 8 children of hard-working parents, Barney and Carmel. My father died when I was only 2 years of age, and my eldest sister Mary was just 15. My mum was a tough woman, but very caring of all of us. Raising 8 kids as a war widow was no easy job. I'm very pleased my older sister Mary and her husband Ian McLean have joined us in the chamber. It's a big effort to fly across the country to be here for this speech, and I appreciate it deeply. I hope that Andy, Marg, Stephen, Claire, Bert and Joe are watching, plus the various spouses, children and grandchildren. There are more than 80 Jonos around the country. In particular, I want to note my sister Marg and her husband Ike. All of us love Marg, and we're proud that she was awarded an AO for her services to education. As I explained in my inaugural speech, my childhood shaped my politics. It's why I always support those who are doing their best for their families and our community. I also need to acknowledge the Cannington Labor branch members, some of whom have joined us today. All members of Parliament stand on the shoulders of others, and it is on their shoulders that I've been standing as the member for Cannington. It's said that politics is show business for ugly people, which is probably why I fitted in so well. 41 years as a member of the Labor Party, including 9 years at the SDA, 11 years in party office and 16 years in Parliament. I've had a charmed career and I'm always grateful for the opportunities that have come my way. I got involved in politics to help change the world, and I'm pleased I've had some success. I finished Year 12 in 1980 and I expected I would go on to university and become a school teacher, a noble profession, I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely.
However, instead I was accepted into the AFS Student Exchange program. That meant while my friends started uni in 1981, I worked full-time at the Department of Foreign Affairs in the basement, packing mail bags for 6 months, before heading to Indonesia in July of 1981, going back to high school for an extra year at SMR 2 Bandung, Government High School No. 2 Bandung. Living in Indonesia certainly changed me forever, and not just because I learned a second language. It changed my attitudes, exposed me to a different life, a different religion and many different cultures. Keliwaga Sumawiganda, the Sumawiganda family, accepted me as a son. I still keep in touch with Larry, Rudy, Ben, Titan and Pri, my 5 brothers, as well as Ibu Sumawiganda. They still treat me as one of their family all these many years later. It's a joy to be with them, including their wives, children and now grandchildren too. The other students on the program also made a big impression. Tim Dalzell, my Kiwi mate from Palmy North, was with me in Bandung, along with Micah Newhouse from the Netherlands. Sylvie Nice from Belgium, now lives in Spain. Peter Diamond from Wisconsin, as well as Tanya Teese, Mark James and Lucinda Chappell from around Australia, are all still friends all these many years later. Petting Williams, who was in Jakarta for her year, is now the Australian ambassador to Indonesia. What a job that would be. It was great to see her last year as part of the WA delegation led by Premier Cook. I also want to acknowledge the many friends I had at SMR Dua, classmates like Nita Pusparia and her sister Irene Amprianti. It was certainly an incredible experience. I've been very lucky to make some great friends along the way in life. Dan Kennedy and I started in kindergarten together, and we still keep in touch. Leon Rebar did an AFS program the same as me, but he went to the US. Steve Hodgkin is into cars, even more than I am. Paul Wentworth is still a true friend. I keep in touch with many of the guys from Darramullen. And one of those guys was Stephen Conroy, and we met in 1974, and we were always talking politics. One night in June 1983, Steve rang me to say he was heading off to a Labor Party meeting. Would I like to come and join as well? It seemed like a great idea at the time. But I must say I didn't have any idea where that decision would take me. At the meeting I met Michael Kerrisk and Stephen Booth, who were at ANU with Steve. The 4 of us had much to learn, but we quickly worked out that we needed to take over the ACT-ALP. That's why we formed the faction, complete with our own salute. Later, we were joined by Craig Shannon, and while we never did manage to take control of the ACT-ALP, we certainly took control of ACT Young Labor, and I got to be ACT-YL president in 1988. There were lots of others like Sally Standen and Ruth Webber, who were also part of the team. We supported an engineer with the New South Wales Railways to be ACT-YL secretary, Mike Kaiser. Like so many of the people I've met over my Labor years, Mike is a contributor. Stephen Conroy was the first of us to get a job in politics, going onto the staff of Ros Kelly. Ros introduced us to the whole pantheon of Labor icons of the 1980s, from Bob Hawke and Paul Keating to John Button, Kim Beazley and Graham Richardson, just to name some. Later, Steve moved to Melbourne and became a dominating influence in Victorian politics. A senator for Victoria, he was deputy leader of the Labor Party in the Senate and a minister. When Steve decided to leave the Senate, and we've just been texting about this, he famously just tabled his speech rather than reading it live. It meant that many people missed the big story. In the speech, he outed my high school nickname. Given I have been labelled as one of the leaders of the WA Labor Right faction, it surprises some of that my nickname at high school was Jono the Como. But for me, Steve is my mate, and while I can't ski, it's always great to be together with Steve, his wife, Paula Benson, and their lovely daughter, Bella. I think it's remarkable that we're still friends after 50 years. Perhaps our friendship has lasted this long because I live here in Perth and he lives in Melbourne. Michael Kerrisk went on to be the ACT-ALP branch secretary and put the branch on a professional footing. Steve Booth worked for the AWU, including here in WA, and later worked for Victorian Labor governments. Craig Shannon, a close friend of both the Speaker and the member for Lansdale, has worked hard for Labor in many ways. Craig's parties at his rental properties in the 1980s were legendary. I can't say out loud what they were called. Of course, something to do with Bond. Of course, we didn't only hang out with young Labor types. I met a rising talent at the time, Margaret Quirk, who was a local branch member as well. I'm proud to have served here in the Parliament with the member for Lansdale, the godmother, I should say, of my son.
It was the suit. Sorry.
In the 1980s, I met a staffer for Kim Beazley, Ed Dermer, and we are still friends today. He served the people of this state very well as the member for North Metropolitan Region. Canberra in the 1980s was a great place to meet staffers, including Maurice Yemmer, who would go on to be New South Wales Premier, and my friend David Tierney, who has had a very interesting life. In fact, the members of our Mount Ainslie branch included Gary Gray, Dr Craig Emerson and Bob McMullen, just to name a few. It was an exciting time. We all knew the Hawke-Keating Labor government was changing Australia forever and for the better. Economic reform, industry reform, the Accord, Medicare, superannuation, the social wage. It was the start of modern Australia, a dynamic, trading, multicultural country setting a path to prosperity. Another Mount Ainslie branch member was the Labor legend, the late Fred Daly. Fred had been elected to Parliament in 1943 and retired in 1975. He treated our group of activists with great respect. Fred was a generous mentor to us. One of his most important lessons was to make sure at least one of us had read the rules. That became my job, and I've continued that with the standing orders. He also told us never to assume how anyone will vote. You can believe the person who says they will never vote for you under any circumstance is a no, everybody else is a maybe. Likewise, I met you, Madam Speaker. One night, Ed Dermer invited me to join a dinner in Manuka with some of the members of the ALP National Executive, and that's where I met the Speaker. The Speaker's husband, Greg Roberts, is likewise another good friend. I've always been pleased to have Greg as my +1 at the V8 supercars each year. Of course, I've got to do some really interesting things through politics. 1985 was the United Nations International Year of Youth, and there were two big international youth conferences divided by the Cold War. The KGB funded the International Union of Youth and Students, and they held a conference in Moscow. Instead, I went to the pro-Western event, the International Youth Conference in Kingston, Jamaica. I met Michael Danby at the conference, who of course went on to be a federal MP. I also met Matthew Strasberg, a staffer from New South Wales, and Ian Blanthorne, the Assistant National Secretary of the SDA. Steve Conroy asked me to nominate as the youth representative on the board of the Australian Bicentennial Authority. I still have the letter from Prime Minister Bob Hawke appointing me as a director. On the board of the authority from 1985 to 89, I was given an education on the workings of a quango, learning that you're ahead of the game just by reading the meeting papers. I think that's a good lesson in life, no matter what your job you have. In 1991, I went to Indonesia as part of the Australia-Asia Young Political Leaders Program. The delegation leader was Cameron O'Reilly, who at the time was a staffer for Foreign Affairs Minister Laurie Brereton. Cameron and I are still friends. He's now a leading voice in Australia's energy transition. Another friend from that trip is Jodie Facina, who is also a Labor staffer. Jodie's friendship endures through many changes. And I also met Dean Smith on that trip. In 2002, I was guest of the US State Department for the midterm elections. It was a fascinating insight, but also met some interesting people. Lizzie Blanthorne and Jason Clare were both part of the delegation. I'd been to the Kingston, Jamaica conference in '85 with Lizzie's father, and Lizzie is now a minister in the Victorian government. Jason Clare is now the Federal Minister for Education. Simon Birmingham was also on that trip and is now, of course, the Senator for South Australia, and even Barnaby Joyce was one of the crew. One day, when I was Assistant State Secretary, I went to Fletcher Rowan Associates. When I walked in, Ian Fletcher said, "I've met you before." He'd been First Assistant Secretary at the Australian Customs Service when I was a lowly payroll clerk, but he still remembered me. I've always appreciated Fletch giving me advice and suggestions over the years. I'm pleased to say that not everyone that has helped me during my career have been Labor people. I've always been upfront about my views. Some people might suggest too upfront. But if you don't get along with people you disagree with, how can society function? And if you won't consider other people's views, how do you know your views are correct? Bradley Wood started as CEO of the Australian Hotels Association at the same time as I started as Assistant State Secretary, and we met soon afterwards, and I'm pleased that we're still friends. I always tell Bradley that he's my second favourite Liberal because Paul Everingham and I are also friends. Paul was the WA Liberal State Director in 2005, which is not the usual path to becoming a friend of the ALP State Secretary. However, once Paul was off in industry, we struck up a great friendship. He was great to work with at the CME during COVID. On that score, I want to acknowledge Claire Wilkinson from APIA and Warren Pearce from AMEC for their contributions during COVID. I'm pleased that many people in business have helped me over the years. The Honourable Nick Griffiths introduced me to his university friend Neil Hamilton, and Neil Hamilton introduced me to Tony Howarth. They've both been great supporters over the years. My good friend Peter Clough, who's in the chamber, has always been a strong Labor man, and at the time he worked for Western Mining when I was Assistant State Secretary. He put me in touch with many people in the mining industry, too many to name, who are happy to educate me on how mining works, how a mine plan is connected to commodity prices, how exploration is the key to sustaining projects, how mining services make a strong mining sector. Lessons that have proved very valuable. Likewise, as State Secretary, I helped Eric Gripper manage energy reforms through the party. He and his team helped me understand the complexities of the energy system and why an efficient energy system serves working people. This was the foundation that I built my interest in energy policy, which is so fundamental to our economy. Of course, my career through the SDA to party office and into Parliament would not have happened without the support of many Labor stalwarts. I met the late Jim Maher, National President of the SDA, as a fellow Director of the Australian Bicentennial Authority. His common sense, advice and support were instrumental to my journey through the party. In 1989, I decided to leave the public service in Canberra and move to Melbourne to see what might happen down there. On my last day at the Customs Service, Jim rang me up and asked me to come to work for him. Because Jim was also the Victorian SDA Secretary, I assumed he meant in Melbourne. When I said yes, he said, "Great, you start in Perth next week." So the next week I arrived in Perth to be met by the SDA's Assistant Secretary Joe Bullock and a senior organiser, the Honourable Kate Doust. So yes, Kate Doust is literally the first woman I met in Perth. At the SDA, I worked with some great officials. Mark Bishop, the SDA Secretary, was very supportive of my career. Bill McIntosh, now a life member of WA Labor, was a great mentor. The Honourable Martin Pritchard and Stuart McLean were part of a talented team of dedicated officials. I also made friends with SDA officials in other states like Don Farrell and Tom Koutsantonis from South Australia. At the SDA, I also served as Vice President of the TLC, now Unions WA. It was an important time fighting against the first, second and third waves of anti-worker laws in this state. The late Tony Cook, Steph Mayman, Tony Robinson, Sharon Jackson, Fran Logan and Genevieve Freeman were just some of the people I got to know as we worked to rid our state of those unfair laws. Peter O'Keefe and Ben Harris would each, in turn, be the SDA Secretary while I was a member for Cannington, and I thank them for their support. Union secretaries are in touch with working people. Their thoughts and advice should not be undervalued. I also got to know a man with a brain the size of a planet, Dr Tony Buddy, and I enjoyed sitting next to the Minister for Education for 3 years in Parliament. From the SDA, I went to be WA Labor's Assistant Secretary in January 98 and then Secretary in May 01. This is how I met Raj Shavendra, a great friend and supporter. Sel is a true Labor icon and we all wish Ambega all the best. Inside the Labor Party, there's an indestructible bond that I've always been pleased to be part of, the Ex-Secretaries Club. Mark Cuomo, Stephen Smith and John Howden helped me as part of that special bond. I was pleased to help both Patrick Gorman and Tim Picton while they were secretaries as part of the responsibilities of the club. However, I don't know that either of them really needed my help. I'm looking forward to Ellie Whittaker becoming a senator and joining the club very soon. The club includes Assistant State Secretaries, and so the Honourable Sally Talbot and Cassie Rowe, the member for Belmont, are also members. And I look forward to Lauren Cayoon becoming an MLC and joining soon as well. And then there is Linda O'Sharlam, the most dynamic of all the Assistant State Secretaries. I hope that her immense talents can be found a role in public life in some way. Oh, that's right. I also acknowledge Lenda's fiancé, the Minister for Mines. The Ex-Secretaries Club includes members from all around Australia, and I've always enjoyed talking with people like Tim Gartrell, Michael Brown, Mark Abib and Stephen Loosely, just to name a few. At the Labor Party, I worked with the late Jim Miller, Rob Meacham and Rob Mitchell to set up the Labor Business Roundtable to reconnect Labor and the business community. It must have worked because 25 years later it's still operating. I don't have time to go through every campaign that I've been involved with, but there are a few that I want to mention. In 1999, I spent 6 weeks working on the Monero State campaign in New South Wales. Our candidate was John Durst, a restaurateur. He needed a 23.5% swing to win. We got a 23% swing, fell just half a point short. When John found out that I was into cars, he lent me his own car for me to drive on those country roads in New South Wales, a Porsche 911. Not the car you expect to use as a Labor campaign worker. When Jeff Gallop resigned as Premier and stood aside from Victoria Park, Ben Wyatt replaced him. I live in that electorate and I thought about running myself, but Ben was clearly a better candidate. I wanted someone to be Ben's assistant, so I hired a young Labor activist. Even 18 years ago, I knew Varun Ghosh had a bright future. I'm so pleased he's now a Senator for Western Australia. The 2007 Peel by-election was very tricky for WA Labor, but Paul Papalia was the correct choice. His service to Australia in the Navy is unsurpassed, and he increased the Labor vote. Again, I needed a young Labor person to look after Paul. That was Terry Healy, not in his seat, the member for Southern River. In the lead up to the 2007 federal election, Kim Beazley said to me that we should run an ex-military person for the seat of Stirling, and I told Kim that I knew just the man. I'd met Major Peter Tinley AO some time before. While Peter missed out narrowly in 2007, he was ready to step up as the member for Willagee, and I'm pleased to have shared so many experiences with my friend Peter over our years together. The period of opposition between 08 and 17 was very tough. Time in opposition is never fun at all. But it's a time of opportunity. It was a rare privilege to work with a talented group of people to hold the Barnett government to account. No successful opposition just whinges. You have to put together a genuine vision, and we certainly did that. What a talented group. Ben, Paul and Peter, as well as Mark McGowan, Roger Cook, Rita Safiotti, just to name a few. The whole team played their part. Mark McGowan became the dominating personality in WA politics like no one before him. No observer of politics in 2016 predicted how dominating Mark McGowan would become. The 2021 election was the biggest political victory in anywhere in Australia's history. I met the Premier, Roger Cook, before I went into party office. Even then, in the 90s, you knew Roger had the talent to go far. The Deputy Premier has no equal in being across policy detail, which is probably why the opposition never asked her a question. Rita was part of Jeff Gallop's opposition office from '97, and we worked together right through my time in party office, along with Kieran Murphy and Bruce Campbell-Fraser. WA is very lucky with the calibre of our cabinet. The Honourable Stephen Dawson, along with the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Health, the Minister for Training and Workforce Development and the Minister for Local Government, just to name a few. I've known them for many years before they were in Parliament, and Western Australians know they'll always do what is right for WA. I want to acknowledge the people that were elected as part of the class of 2008. It's been great to serve with you, particularly the members for Maylands and Gosnells who are leaving with me at the same time. And also all my PL friends. You know who you are, as the member for Lansdale said. After the 01 election, I needed to find a new executive officer to do the Labor Business Roundtable's admin work. Kate suggested I hire our neighbour, Fran Lane. Fran built the organisation a strong foundation. I used to threaten business people that they were not allowed to offer Fran a job, but eventually that is what happened. I was very pleased that Fran came back to work with me after I was elected to Parliament, and Fran has been my electorate officer for 15 years. Fran has been indispensable. During my time as a minister, Fran was the real member for Cannington. After Fran left the round table, I needed to hire another hard worker, so I was pleased when the Honourable Sam Rowe came to work. And I'm pleased he's now contributing in the Legislative Council. I've been very fortunate with my electorate staff. David Ashton, a friend and supporter, set up my office, a job he did well. My first full-time electorate officer was Jerry Madden, and she stayed for over 10 years. Other staff included Danae Sinnott, Jessie Yang and Grace Lamont, among others. Penny Bond worked with me in Cannington prior to the 2017 election and then worked in my Min office. Now Penny is a lawyer and will probably end up as a High Court Justice. Joseph Stevens replaced Penny in my Cannington office, an incredible talent. He later came into my Min office as well. In my EO, Joseph was replaced by Matt O'Keefe, who was stolen from me by the Minister for Housing, so I hired Matt's brother Luke. They job shared with Ashley Winehurst until Ash went to work for Madeline King, and now Shane Hill is with me. A steady and experienced hand is the former member for Geraldton. Of course, I also had Ron Sayo work for 2 years in my Cannington office. Ron grew up in the Cannington area, attending local schools. In my EO, his mum would bring him lunch most days, and we all miss her passing. Ron first worked for me at party office as a campaign organiser in 2004. Later he worked in the Gallup and Carpenter governments before coming to Cannington in 2008. After working in federal and local governments, I was pleased he joined me in my ministerial office in 2017 as my Deputy Chief of Staff, and after the 21 election when Neil Roberts retired as my Chief of Staff. Now Ron is WA Labor's candidate for Cannington at the 25 election. I know he has the skills, education and experience to be a great member for Cannington. It makes it easy to retire from politics when I know that Ron Sayo is ready to serve the Cannington community. My 7-year service as a minister was a rare privilege. The workload is unbelievable, but it was made possible by my personal staff. They're all talented people, lawyers, journalists even, clerical workers, even a diamond valuer. People like Mark Andrews, David Alexander and Hope Smith, just to name a few. I thank them all for their efforts. I appreciate them all. Any achievements I had as a minister is only because of the hard work of my personal staff. But I particularly pay tribute to Vetty Koukoulis and Belinda Link, who both started with me in 2017 and were still there in 2023. I also acknowledge the thousands of public sector workers in government departments and trading enterprises that I worked with. Society can only function with a strong public sector, and I thank you for your service and support during the time that I was a minister. Now I want to come back to the Cannington community to talk a bit about the huge changes to the residents of Cannington over these 16 years. The 2007 census recorded about 36,000 residents in Cannington. The 2023 census recorded almost 55,000. In 2007, 35% of residents were born overseas. Now it's 51%. In 2007, about 21% of residents spoke a language other than English at home. Now it's 45%. Cannington is home to people literally from every corner of the world, with the top source countries being India, Malaysia, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, New Zealand, Singapore, Burma and Pakistan, as well as many people from the African continent, joining previous waves of migrants from the UK and Italy. Cannington is not just more ethnically diverse, it's also more religious. About 50% of West Australians told the last census they had a religion, but in Cannington almost 63% of residents are religious. While Catholics are still the largest religion, 10% of locals are Muslims, which is 4 times the state average. Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs are just as common as Anglicans. This is all part of the dynamic change to the Cannington community. When I used to host, the student leaders from the local high schools such as Linwood Senior High School, Sevenoaks College or St Norbert's College here at Parliament for lunch each year, these young leaders would tell me that multiculturalism is the best thing about their schools. Cannington is now a community of first home buyers, parents with school-aged children, skilled trade workers and people with technical degrees. And Cannington is Western Australia's most multicultural community. It strikes me that it's hard to recognise the huge shift in what it means to be Australian if you're not exposed to the changing Australia every day like I am in Cannington. You want a taste of the real Australia? Don't go to the beach, don't go to a farm, come out to Westfield Carousel. Multiculturalism is Australia's superpower. It allows us to be strong and vibrant. Yes, we need to manage the challenge of growth, but managing growth is a much better problem to have than managing economic and social stagnation. I'm proud of the work I've done on behalf of the Cannington community. I'm not going to list out everything I've helped with, but the current Metronet project to remove the level crossings is clearly the highlight. In 100 years' time, this project will still be benefiting the Cannington community. My job as the member for Cannington has been to work for our community, helping local people to find solutions to problems in their life. There's always more to be done, but that's the real world of politics. I'll just skip a bit. So to close.
Don't.
I'm not enforcing the time.
Well, I was just going to say, the process of politics is coming under attack from many quarters. I think the breakdown of discussion and debate is a serious challenge for public policy. How can you debate policy if everyone you talk to agrees with you? How can you have a debate if you label anyone who disagrees with you? It just doesn't make sense. Once upon a time, we agreed the facts, then argued about the consequences. Now we live in a post-truth world. How can complex policy issues be progressed if conspiracies and innuendo are given the same values as facts and analysis? What's the point of election policies if costings and timelines are considered just boring details? We can all do better. So to close, in the movie Invictus, Morgan Freeman, playing the role of Nelson Mandela, sends Matt Damon in the role of Francois Pienaar a copy of the poem Invictus to inspire him for the Rugby World Cup. Invictus is the poem that Nelson Mandela had used for inspiration during his 27 years on Robben Island. However, this is not well known, but it was actually a Hollywood variation. Mandela, in fact, sent Pienaar the man in the arena, an extract from a speech by Teddy Roosevelt, the then US president, that he had delivered to the Sorbonne in 1910. So my last words to the Parliament are the man in the arena. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid who neither know victory nor defeat. I'm honoured to spend some time in the arena. Thanks, Dave.
Shouldn't push in front of the Premier. Bill. And more names than Ted Carney. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
A big softy.
Yeah, I am. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you.
Sorry.
Even got my key lines in.
What a great career. What a very memorable. Thank you for your
Very
Bill, that's amazing. Thank you for your service. It's lovely to have worked with you.
Well, where's Ali?
I remember our interviews when you say she's always a smart ass.
still can't get over. Well done, brother. Well done. Thank you.
Okay.
where are we up to? All right, so who's the leader of the House?
Thanks for everything. You're brilliant. It's excellent. And I love the great speech and a great everybody. I really admire you.
Look after yourself, all right? I'm sure we'll catch up a lot more now.